Okay, and before we start the class, I have an announcement to make. It is about the paper presentation, and you can also find the announcement on Moodle, okay? So basically, the presentation dates will be May the 20th and May the 27th, okay? So it will be like the 14th and 15th week of the semester. So every group has 25 minutes to present your paper, followed by a 3 minutes QA, okay? And each group can have 2 or 3 students, okay? So you have to choose a paper, obviously, related to graph theory. But I know that some of your research area is not about graph theory. But in many computer science area, you can find papers that use graph theory, for example, to model problems or to model some system components. Okay, so in your selected paper, you have to ensure that the paper models some problem or system component using graph theory terminology. And also, the paper should contain some algorithm or graph theoretical property, okay? And so that's about the paper, okay? And for the presentation, I think the main purpose of the paper presentation is not to present new graph theory results or new algorithm or new proofs, okay? No, I think the main reason for this paper presentation is to connect graph theory with other applications in computer science. For example, perhaps you can find applications in computer networks or vehicle networks or social networks, okay? So basically you have to, in your presentation, you have to introduce the motivation, okay? So, and remember that some of the students, they are only undergraduate students, okay? So you have to make sure that everyone can understand your presentation, okay? So that means you have to give us enough background so that we can follow your presentation, okay? All right, so the first part is about the motivation, and then you have to explain the relationship between the paper and graph theory, okay? So for example, what is the graph discussed in the paper, okay? So perhaps the paper may use graph theory to model a problem or a system component, okay? So that's what you have to explain in your presentation. And then the algorithm and graph property, okay? So here, you don't need to explain the correctness or proof or analysis, okay? Because you only have 25 minutes, and the goal is not to present proof or analysis. The goal is to introduce some application of graph theory, okay? Right, and for each part, it is better to use examples to illustrate these ideas, okay? And there's a Google form, okay, where you can fill in the group members and paper title, okay? And if you have difficulty in finding your group members, you can send an email to me, okay? And that's it, okay? So we have like 3 to 4 weeks to prepare the presentation. Well, it would be better if you choose some papers from top conference or top journals. Yeah. So, yeah, I think, for example, if you are doing research in AI, then perhaps you can select papers from Triple AI or NIPS or ICML. Okay, so those are the top conferences in machine learning. Okay, and if you're doing research in, say, computer networks, then you can look for like for AI, ICML, NIPS. Okay, so these are top conferences for machine learning. Okay, and so if you want to read some papers related to computer networks, then you can search Infocom. Okay, so that's one of the top conferences in computer networks. And so what areas do we have here? Okay, 所以我不知道大家的领域是什么，有没有我没有列在上面的。Or if you want to read some theoretical paper, then you can search like SOTA, Fox, and Stock. Okay, so these are the top conferences in theoretical computer science. Okay, and it's easy to find connections between this theoretical paper and graph theory. Okay. Yeah, I think that's about it. OK， 所以 paper 的报告有问题吗？哦，校庆是放假吗 ？Really？ 我看一下，我看一下。所以确定放假吗？所以20有放假是不是？我看一下。没关系，我看一下。哦，All right, so I think then I have to move the dates to so basically we just postponed 1 week, okay? So the second presentation date will be June the 3rd. So this also means we probably have to make our final exam online, okay? Because there's only 16 weeks, and this is already the last week. So the final exam will be an online exam. So you can use ChatGPT or any AI tools you want, okay? 所以我刚才得知这个讯息，谢谢。所以就是稍微往后1周，然后最后一个期末考就变线上考试这样子。因为之前本来就有人找我说他最后1周可能不能来考试，所以为了公平起见，我本来就打算要可以用 ChatGPT 这些 AI。所以那现在如果是变这样的话，可能就是需要往后1周，然后考试就变线上。OK， 还有其他问题吗？可以。Yeah. 还有其他问题吗？然后 presentation 可以用中文，也可以用英文，这我记得第1周就有回答过。 结合的部分，对对对，所以我刚刚说，就是演算法它的正确性不是特别重要。那如果那个演算法要非常复杂的话，其实也不用讲 detail， 你就讲 high level 的 idea 就可以了。不用讲证明，因为你只有25分钟。然后我刚好说，因为就是大家的领域不太一样，所以比如说你是研究所的，你可能要就是体谅一下这边有大学部的，所以可能你需要介绍一下整个 background。如果是研究所同学，那如果大学部，我想也是一样，就是你应该要假设可能听众就是大一、大二的这样子，可能是会比较安全一点。OK， 还有其他问题吗？Okay, so today we're going to start a new topic, but still it is related to matching. Okay, but this will be the last topic about matching. Okay, so the topic is stable matching. Okay, so in the problem of stable matching, you can imagine that you work for a dating agency as a matchmaker. So you have some male clients and some female clients, and you have to match these clients. Okay, and you want to find a good match. Okay, so let me first give you an example. So in order to find a good matching, you are given some information. So the information is that for every client, he or she will provide a preference list. Okay? So you're going to use these preference lists to match your clients. Okay, suppose you have 3 men and 3 women as your clients, and these clients offer you their preference lists. Okay, so for example, for Peter, so this JML is Peter's preference list. So this means if Peter can choose, Peter will choose Jen. Okay, so Jen will be his first choice, followed by Mary, and Peter's last choice will be Linda. Okay, so this is Peter's preference list. So for every client, you have his or her preference list. Okay, so this is for Jen. So for Jen, her favorite will be John. Okay, second favorite, Peter, and least favorite will be Peter. Okay. Okay, so your job is to match these 3 women to these 3 men. So obviously, you cannot, for example, match a man to 2 different women. Okay, and also you have to match every client. Okay, So it's like you have to find a perfect matching, okay? But this time you have to find a perfect matching like with respect to these preference lists, okay? So now there's no clear way of defining what a good matching is. But as you'll see next, there are some matching that you should avoid, okay? So for example, we can consider list matching. Okay, so in this matching, we match Jen to David, Mary to John, and Linda to Peter. And I claim that this is not a good matching. Okay, you should avoid this matching. And the reason is that this matching is not stable. Okay, and the reason that this is not a stable matching is because, well, if you focus on this pair, Mary and Peter, and I claim that this is an unstable pair. So why is that Mary and Peter form an unstable pair? The reason is that in this matching, they are not matched together. Okay, so Mary is matched to John, and Peter is matched to Linda. Okay, but let's first consider Mary. Okay, so Mary, so if Mary can choose, she will choose Peter because Peter is her favorite. So compare Peter with John. Mary would prefer Peter to John. Okay. Similarly for Peter, so Peter is matched to Linda in this matching. Okay, so Linda is here, her last choice, his last choice, and for Mary is Peter's second choice. Okay, so once again you can see that Peter prefers Mary to Linda. Okay, so whenever you have a pair that is not matched according to your matching, yet they prefer each other to their partner in the matching, and we said that this is an unstable pair. Okay. So let me first give you the definition. Okay, so this is the definition for unstable pair. So basically, you have to find an unmatched pair. Okay, and also before you start to discuss unstable pair, you have to first have a matching. Okay, so first you have a matching, and then you find an unmatched pair. Okay, and see whether if for this unmatched pair they prefer each other to their partner in the matching. Okay. Okay, so this is the definition for unstable pair. And what is unstable matching? So basically, if there's no unstable pair, okay, so you have a matching and you check all unmatched pairs, and if there's no unstable pair, then the matching is stable. Okay. So this is a matching without unstable pairs. Okay. So that's the definition for stable matching. Okay. So an obvious question about stable matching is that can we always find a stable matching? So given these preference lists, is it always possible to find stable matching? Okay. So we're going to answer this question under some natural assumption, that is the number of men and women are the same, and we all have their preference lists. Okay. So do you think it is always possible to find a stable matching? No? So can you find a counterexample? Okay, so every man has the same preference lists. Okay. But I want to stress that a stable matching does not imply that everyone is matched to his favorite. Right? It is possible that someone is matched to his or her second or third favorite. That's possible. Right? Because you only have to compare this unmatched pair with the matching you have. So you are not compared your matching to like the best possible. Because certainly, if, say, so for Peter and David, they have the same first choice. So you're not going to satisfy both of them. So some of them will be matched to like the second or third favorite. That's possible, and that will satisfy stable matching. So let me give you a very simple example. Okay. Okay, so let's consider this case. So 2 men and 2 women, okay? And they all have the same preference lists, okay? So A and B, they have the same preference lists. C and D, they have the same preference lists. So is this a stable matching? So which one? So let's focus on B and C and check if B and C form an unstable pair, okay? So for B, well, B cannot form an unstable, no. So B indeed prefers C to D, all right? Because according to the preference lists, B's favorite is C, okay? And in the matching, it is matched to D. So yes, we have satisfied like the first constraint. Okay. So B prefers C to D. Okay. How about C? Okay. Well, for the case of C, C is matched to its favorite. Okay. So this does not satisfy the second constraint. Okay. We can also check AD. Okay. And right, so for A, he is already matched to his favorite. Okay, so we cannot satisfy both constraints. Okay. So anyway, I think this example tells you that whenever, even if we have some like contradiction or conflicts, by conflicts I mean they have the same preference list, it is still possible to have stable matching. Okay, because we do not require that everyone is matched to his or her favorite. Okay? Sometimes, like for B, well, B is matched to his second favorite. Okay? So now let's go back to this question. So now, do you think it is always possible to find a stable matching? So now it seems like this problem has less constraints, less limitation, right? Because even if you have conflicts, it is still possible to find stable matching. So now perhaps, yeah, it is possible. Okay. So indeed, we're going to show that it is always possible, and we'll give you an algorithm. And the algorithm is quite simple, okay, and quite natural. Okay, so because we have men and women, so we're going to let men propose to women. So women will receive some proposals, perhaps multiple proposals. For example, if we let Peter and David propose, then according to their preference lists, both of them will propose to Jen. Okay? So in this case, Jen will receive 2 proposals. So now if you're Jen, clearly, according to your preference lists, you're going to choose Peter, right? Because for Jen, Peter is better than David, according to the preference list. Okay. So first step, we let men propose to women. Second step, we let women accept and also reject some proposals, okay, according to the preference list. Okay. And then rejected men will need to like update their preference list. For example, in this case, David will be rejected by Jen. So David will, well, he has no choice but to remove Jen from his preference list, okay? And that's it. So, and then we're going to repeat, okay? So in every round, we have 3 steps. First, men propose to women according to preference list. Second, women reject and accept proposals, once again according to preference list. And third, rejected men update their preference list by removing women from his preference lists. Okay. Okay. So first step. So very simple algorithm. And so next, let's apply the algorithm to this example. Okay. Okay, so the algorithm obviously finishes when every man and women, and when they are matched. Okay. Okay, so first round, first step. So Peter proposes to Jen, and John proposes to Mary, and David proposes to Jen. Okay, so this is the first step. And the second step, well, for Jen, according to her preference lists, Jen will reject David's proposal. Okay, so Mary only receives one proposal, so she has no choice but to accept John's proposal. And for Linda, Linda receives no proposal, so she waits. Okay. So that's the second step. And the third step, David is rejected, so David removes Jen from his preference list. Okay. So this is first round. Okay, so in the second round, so I should add one more detail. That is, in the first step, only the men that are not matched, only them propose to women. Okay. So if a man is already matched to some woman, then the man will not make any proposals. Okay, so in the second round, the only new proposal is from David to Mary. Okay, so this is the first step. So only one new proposal is made. Now in the second step, we only need to consider Mary. So Mary has already received two proposals. So Mary also needs to consider the proposals that she receives in the previous round. Okay. So Mary can choose between John and David. Okay. So between John and David, well, John is better than David according to the preference list. So once again, David is rejected. Okay. So in the last step, David updates his preference list by removing Mary from the list. So this is the second round. Okay, now the third round. Okay, so once again, David is the only unmatched man. So only David makes a proposal. Now David makes a proposal to Linda. Okay. and only Linda receives a proposal in the third round. So Linda, well, she has no choice because she only receives one proposal. So she can only accept the proposal from David. Okay? So no one is rejected in this round, and everyone is matched to someone else. So this finishes the algorithm. Okay, okay, so perhaps we can check some unmatched pair, see if they are really not unstable. So perhaps let's check Linda and Peter. Okay. Now from Linda's point of view, Linda's favorite is Peter. Okay. So definitely Peter is better than David from Linda's eye. Okay. So we have satisfied the first constraint. Now for Peter, what about Peter's favorite is Jen? Okay, so the second constraint is not satisfied. Okay, so this is not an unstable pair. Okay, and let's check Linda and John. Okay, so they are not matched, and we already know that. Sorry, we have to check this again. So John and David. Okay, so for Linda, once again, John is better than her current partner in the matching, David. Okay, so first constraint satisfied. Okay, and from John's point of view, well, John is matched to his favorite, so the second constraint is not satisfied. So once again, this is not an unstable pair. Okay, so basically you can check all these unmatched pairs, and you'll see that they are not unstable pairs. Okay, so this is the algorithm. Are there any questions? 有问题吗？所以演算法还蛮单纯的，就是每一个回合就是男生会 propose 给女生，然后女生就会，然后男生在 propose 的时候会根据他的 preference list， 所以他当然会先 propose 给他最喜欢的，然后女生一样会根据他的 preference list 来决定他要接受谁的 proposal，OK，然后最后就是被拒绝的男生他就必须要去 update 他的preference list。Okay, so this is the algorithm, but we haven't shown that this is correct. So by correct, we have to show that first, the output is stable, okay? And second, we have to show that the output, well, the time complexity, okay? So how many rounds do we need to find a stable matching or to output a matching, okay? Okay, so before we prove these properties, I want to first give you some very simple facts. Okay. So fact number 1. Okay, so the first fact is that once a woman receives a proposal, okay, from some man, Then we know that in the following execution of the algorithm, she will always be matched to some man. Okay? Do you agree? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so by matched, I mean like temporarily matched. Right, so for example, after the first round, we'll say that Jen is temporarily matched to Peter because perhaps Jen will receive a better proposal in the future. So when that happens, Jen can find a better partner. Right. Yeah, so for this case, Mary is temporarily matched to John after the first round. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, when the algorithm terminates. That is also correct, but that is not the point that I try to make. Okay, so for this one, all I want to say that if, from every woman's point of view, once the woman receives a proposal, she will always be matched to some man. But perhaps her partner will change in the future because the woman may receive a better proposal. But anyway, she will always be matched to some man. That is the point that I try to make here. Yeah. Yeah, this is the first one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 Right, so in the second round, Peter and John, since they are already matched to some women, so only David makes a proposal. Okay? Okay? Okay. Yeah, okay, so this is the first fact. So we'll discuss the second fact after the break, okay?
round 一条，每个 round 只能产生一条。
你说哪边？这里吗？
对，应该是每个 round 只能产生一条正确的 match，因为
正确是什么？
就是最终 output 的时候会有个 match。
不一定。
可是它不是这样子吗？就是就一开始就是先把那个嘛，他根据每个人的 preference 是 J M J 点好之后，我就根据每个女的开始选，从这个开始选，然后 B，然后删一个嘛，所以这个就要把它删掉，然后重新念一次，然后再去选它，然后再调，所以应该是有几个女的就有几个 round， 然后每一次。
也不一定有几个女的就有几个 round， 因为譬如说，搞不好第一个 round 就全部结束了，有可能。就是假设一开始他们的这是 J M， 然后假设这是 L， 那他们就第一个 round 就结束了。对，
所以我想太复杂，我还是
我其实我不觉得我有完全理解你的问题啦，所以
我想太复杂，好，我懂你意思。因为我突然想到时间复杂的讲，就是这边你练完之后你还要一个一个检查嘛。我以为你的检查是一个 round，
检查是一个 round，
就假如说你刚刚讲的嘛，就是这里是 L，
对，
就是3条嘛，
对。
可是你电脑不知道它已经是最好最佳解了，所以它还是要检查 Jane， 然后再检查 Mary， 再检查 Linda， 所以就3个 round。检查 Jane， 然后看
检查的意思是什么？
就是他就去 Jane 检查说是不是有他说到的 proposal 里面要接受谁，然后他发现只有一个，他只接受一个，他就接受 Peter， 然后再去检查 Mary 就要检查就看他接受多少 proposal， 然后要接受谁，然后发现一样只有这样就接受，然后再就 Linda， 所以这样有3个。
没错没错。
对，我以为这个
可是这个都是在一个 round。
对，好，我这样懂意思。因为我刚以为那3个 round。
哦，不是，不是一个 round 就会所有的男生 propose 给女生，所有还没有被 match 的男生 propose 给女生，然后所有的女生就会 accept 跟 reject， 然后所有被拒绝的男生就会在
对啊，那这样你就画错。
那什么意思？画错的原因是？
哦，我懂了。就是说这样。
你可以跟我讲一下你刚刚误会的地方。
所以你 first round， 假设你这样弄完之后，其实你还是没有办法确定 Jane 是，假设后面还有。
对，搞不好有，对，搞不好有，对。
期末考是6月3号。
期末考不一定会6月3号，期末考就是因为是线上，所以我有可能对，我可能搞不好周末或什么之类的。哦。对。
我可以在报告的那个要求是什么？因为我刚刚比较晚。
然后报告就是第一个 paper 的部分，就你可以选，你要注意的是就是 paper 要有，简单说要用到 graph， 它可能用 graph 去 model 一个问题，或用 graph 去描述这个系统里面的某一个元件、某一个组织之类的。对。然后再来是这个 paper 应该要有演算法，是跟 graph 有关。或者是如果是比较理论的 paper， 它可能就会用一些 graph 的性质。对，那可能就不一定会有演算法，但是可能就有一些性质这样子。对。然后对这个 paper 的部分。然后报告的部分就是重点不在于要讲 proof 或讲分析，
所以就是介绍这样。
对，那个不是重点，就是我们的 presentation 的目的是要去衔接 graph， 就我们这门课讲的 graph theory 跟实际的应用。
所以是说看那个论文里面的东西跟 graph 有什么连接？
对，所以你应该要先告诉大家说这篇 paper 它的应用是什么。对，可能是 AI 方面的应用，可能是 all round 的应用。对，然后那当然你还是必须要讲说这个 paper 像我刚刚说它用 graph 做了什么事，比如说它去 model 一个问题，对，然后如果它有演算法，或有刚才的性质的话，就是把那个演算法的性质讲出来这样子，不用讲分析，不用讲证明。对，好，才25分钟。 Okay, so the second fact, okay? Okay, so the second fact is about fairness, okay? So a man cannot be matched to 2 or 3 or even more women, okay, in the matching, okay? So this is because once a man is matched to some woman, the man cannot make any more proposal in the future unless the man is rejected by the woman. Okay, so every man can only be matched to at most one woman. Okay, during the execution of the algorithm. Okay? And this is also true for women. Okay, so every woman, well, she needs to accept only one proposal and reject the other proposals. Okay, so these are the two facts about the algorithms. Are there any questions? 有问题吗？所以这两个性质应该都蛮简单的 ，OK。所以第一个就是只要有女生她接收到 proposal， 她就一定都会至少被 match 到一个男生 ，OK， 也会刚好是一个男生的，不会多个男生 ，OK。然后未来如果她换的话，一定会换到一个更好的。Okay, so let's first show that the output, that is the matching when the algorithm terminates, the output must be a matching. Okay, so for the output to be a matching, we have to satisfy two constraints. First, it's about fairness. So every man is matched to at most one woman. And the second constraint is that every man should be matched to some woman, okay? So two constraints. Okay, so for the first point, it is easy because we have the second fact. So this is by fact 2. Okay. So how about the second constraint? So is it possible that when the algorithm finishes, some man is still not matched to any woman? Is it possible? 有没有可能？我们现在第一个 probably 知道是一定不可能有，就类似脚踏两条船，不可能一个男生 match 到多个女生。但是有没有可能有男生根本就没有被 match 到任何一个女生 ？So why not? So yeah, so if this is true, then this implies that also some woman is not matched to any man. Yeah, but is it possible that we have one man and one woman that are not matched to any client? So yeah, why is that the case that we have some women here and some men, and they are not matched to anyone? So you say that for this man, W must still be in his preference list. So why?
如果假设最糟的情况就是，假设剩下那个女生跟剩下那男生都是彼此最后一个顺位，那他们也会 match。所以
Yeah, but I think the question, the main question is that is it possible that W is not in M's preference list? Because if W is not in M's preference list, then M cannot make a proposal to W. So you have to show that this is impossible. So,
如果代表 W 是它里面要被划掉，因为一开始 list 里面每个女的都有，所以如果选在里面的话，代表有其他男的把它干掉，
yeah.
选走了，所以就 W 就被划掉。可是如果 W 被划掉，代表他没有被选，所以他还在里面。
差不多，差不多。
所以那个 preference list 它不是做的排序嘛，对吧？
对，是。
那他们就一定会在里面。
Yeah, but perhaps M has already made a proposal to W, and W reject M, so W is removed from the preference list. But is it possible? So now this is the question. So is it possible that M has already proposed to W, and W reject M, so that W is no longer in M's preference list? Exactly. So if M already proposes to W, and W, so one at the moment that M proposes to W, by the first fact, we already know that W will always be matched to some woman. So this contradicts to our assumption that W is not matched. Okay. So let me write down the proof. Okay. So we're going to prove this by contradiction. So we're going to assume some man called M is not matched to any woman. Okay? And since men and women, they have the same size, okay? So this implies that some woman called W is not matched to any man. Okay? So when the algorithm finishes, it must be the case that M has proposed to every woman. And this includes W, okay? So this is because the algorithm only finishes if every man has proposed to every possible woman if he is not matched to any woman. Okay? Okay. So this implies that W has already received some proposal. So this implies that W is matched to some men. And this is a contradiction because we assume that W is not matched to any man. Okay? So this is the proof for the reason that the output must be a matching. Okay? Or perhaps let me add perfect. Okay? So this means every man and every woman is matched to some client. Okay, so are there any questions? Okay, so before we show that the algorithm outputs a stable matching, let's first consider the time complexity, okay? But in particular, we're going to consider the number of rounds we need, okay? So what is the number of rounds we need at most? Number of, so why? Yeah, but perhaps you're going to replace some of the previous matching. Right, so the algorithm finishes when all men propose to every possible woman, okay? So, yeah, and since there are, let's assume that there are n men and n women, so there are in total n squared proposals. So if there are n squared proposals, and in every round, you have at least one new proposal. Okay, so you need at most n squared rounds. Okay. So in every round, you're going to see at least one new proposal. Okay. And you're not going to see the same proposal twice because once a proposal is rejected, you're not going to see the proposal in the future because it will be removed from the preference list. Okay? Okay. All right, so the last claim is about stable matching. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to once again use proof by contradiction. So this means we're going to assume that the output is not a stable matching. And if a matching is not stable, this implies that there's an unstable pair. Okay? Okay? So this means M is not matched to W in the output. And M prefers W to M's partner in the output. And similarly, W prefers M to W's partner in the output. Okay? So this is our assumption. Okay? And then we try to find some contradiction. And let's assume that in the output, M is matched to W prime. Okay? So in the output, M is matched to W prime. Okay? And from M's point of view, W is better than W prime. Okay? So can you spot the contradiction? So it is not difficult. Okay? Sorry. 一不符合。哎，我没有 follow。No. So this blue edge is the output. Okay, and we assume that this MW is an unstable pair. So if this is an unstable pair, then this means M prefers W to W prime. So why? So what? No. It may be the case that M still prefers it is possible that M prefers W to W prime. Right, but I need the contradiction. Yeah. M prime match 到 W。哦 ，OK， 好。W prime. Yeah. Right. Well, not necessary. So it may be the case that when M proposes to W, W indeed accepts the proposal from M. But in the future, W may reject M. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So So I think it would be easier to give this client some labels. Okay. So these numbers indicate the preference list for M. So for M, W is better than W prime. And for W, M is better than M prime. OK， 所以这里面的数字就是看女生的这边呢，就是男生的视角。这个男生 M 他比较喜欢 W 胜过 W prime。然后从女生的视角 W 来看，我们的主角都是 M 跟 W，OK， 所以从 W 的视角来看的话 ，M 就会比 M prime 更好，OK， 所以这个是因为我们有这里的 unstable pair 的关系 ，OK， 然后接着我们就要去找contradiction，OK，so So because M prefers W to W prime, so M will first propose to W. Okay. But because in the final output, M is not matched to W. So we know that W at some moment rejects M, okay? And when W rejects M, it can only be the case that W is matched to a beta man, okay? So okay, so by the fact that in the output, W and M, they are not matched. So we know that W must reject M at in some round. And the reason that W decides to reject M must be that she receives a better proposal. Okay? So this means W's partner should be better than M. Okay. And that's the contradiction, okay? Okay. So we start from the property given by this unstable pair. And then we try to use the algorithm to find the contradiction. Okay. Any questions? 有问题吗？ Okay. All right, so if there's no question, then we're going to move on to a new topic. So so stable matching will be the last topic about matching. So next, we're going to discuss some questions related to Hamiltonian cycle? Okay. So first of all, what is a Hamiltonian cycle? Okay. So given a graph, okay, a Hamiltonian cycle is a cycle that contains all the vertices in the graph. And the cycle can only use edges in the graph. Okay. So for example, so this graph contains a Hamiltonian cycle. Okay. And this graph does not contain a Hamiltonian cycle. Okay. So yeah, so the task is to find a Hamiltonian cycle or decide whether there's a Hamiltonian cycle or not. Okay, because for some graph there's no Hamiltonian cycle. Okay, so this is the definition. So to discuss Hamiltonian cycle, first you have to have a graph, okay? And a Hamiltonian cycle is a cycle that contains all the vertices in the graph. And we can only use edges in the graph, so you cannot add new edges, okay? Okay. So it turns out that finding or deciding whether there's a Hamiltonian cycle or not is difficult, is extremely difficult, okay? So actually it is NP hard to determine whether a graph has a Hamiltonian cycle or not. Okay, so since the problem is NP-hard, there's no, at least from this moment, we don't know whether there's a polynomial time algorithm to determine whether a graph has a Hamiltonian cycle or not. So we're not going to consider a general algorithm that can output whether a graph has a Hamiltonian cycle or not, okay? So instead, we're going to consider some sufficient condition. That is, if some graph satisfies some property, then we can say that, oh, okay, I know that this graph must have a Hamiltonian cycle. And we want to figure out what this sufficient condition is, okay? So in the following, we're going to discuss some sufficient condition for the existence of Hamiltonian cycle. Also, we're going to discuss some algorithms to output Hamiltonian cycle when the sufficient condition holds. Okay. OK， 所以因为问题是 NP 哈，所以我们不太可能说给你任何一个 graph， 然后就可以 output Hamiltonian cycle。OK， 这非常困难的问题，所以我们会去看一些有特殊性质的 graph， 我们要找出一些特殊的性质。那我们可以说，只要你这个 graph 有满足这个特殊的性质，它就一定会有 Hamiltonian cycle。OK， 所以有没有人可以跟我讲一些很简单的 sufficient condition？就只要这个 graph 它要满足这一些 sufficient condition， 满足这些条件，它就一定会有 Hamiltonian cycle。有吗？所以一个简单的 property， 只要满足，我就保证一定会有 Hamiltonian cycle。Right. So for example, if the graph is complete graph and the number of vertices is at least 3, okay? So if you have at least 3 vertices and the graph is a complete graph, then clearly you have a Hamiltonian cycle, okay? So for example, complete graph, okay? So are there any other sufficient conditions? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, not necessary. Yeah. So well, it depends on what kind of bipolar graph do you have. So do you have only? Oh, okay, complete bipolar graph. Okay. Yeah. So if the graph is a complete bipolar graph, then again, you can find a Hamiltonian cycle. So actually, you don't need to make these two polar sets with the same parity or the same size. Okay. No, they should have the same size, right? Yeah. So balanced complete bipolar graph. Okay. Okay. So the two polar sets should have the same size. Okay. Right. No cut vertex and connected. So a connected graph without cut vertex. So a cut vertex is a vertex that if you remove the vertex and its instant edges, then the graph becomes disconnected. Okay. Yeah, but we need a cycle. Ah. So how about this graph? Okay, so this is a connected graph, and there's no cut vertex because no matter which vertex you remove, it is still connected. But I think we can argue that this one has no Hamiltonian cycle. Right, okay. So how to show that this one has no Hamiltonian cycle? Well, I need a more precise argument. So let's assume that this one has a Hamiltonian cycle. So if it has a Hamiltonian cycle, then it must use these two edges, right? Because a Hamiltonian cycle contains every vertex, and this vertex only has two instant edges, so we have no choice but to select these two edges, okay? So we can just look for any degree 2 vertices, and we know that we must choose these edges, right? Similarly for this one. Okay. Okay, so this is not a cycle, okay? And so actually for this vertex, because the degree is 2, so we know that we have to choose this edge as well. So actually you have to kind of choose every edge, but the result is not a cycle. Good. So even though this is wrong, but it is a good practice to see if it is a sufficient condition. Okay. 所以我刚刚说的就是，我们假设真的有 Hamiltonian cycle 的话，那每一个点都会在里面，所以每一个点它因为是 cycle 嘛，所以它一定会有 两个边会在这个 Hamiltonian cycle 里面，所以这种 degree 2的你就会知道要把它选起来。OK， 所以这个点这两个 edge 就要选起来，这个点这两个 edge 就要选起来，这个点这两个 edge 就要选起来。可是这个很明显就不是一个 Hamiltonian cycle。OK。Okay, so perhaps any other suggestion? 还有其他想法吗？Okay, so if not, I'll give you. Today, I'm going to just give you one more sufficient condition. And the sufficient condition is about the minimum degree. So recall that in the first week, we have shown that if the minimum degree is at least n/2, that is, for every vertex, it has at least n/2 neighbors. So there are lots of edges in the graph if the minimum degree is n/2. So it turns out that if the minimum degree is at least n/2, then not only the graph is connected. So actually, there's a Hamiltonian cycle. Okay? Sorry. No, because for some graph, yeah, even if the minimum degree is n/2, it is not bipartite. Okay. Okay. Yeah, anyway. So next we're going to show that this is true. And also we're going to give you an algorithm to find a Hamiltonian cycle when this condition holds. Okay? So let's start with the algorithm. Okay. So in the first step, we're going to find not a Hamiltonian cycle, but a maximal path. So what is a maximal path? A maximal path is a path such that you cannot extend the path anymore. Okay? So for example, this path is not a maximal path because you can actually add this edge to one of its to this endpoint. Okay. Okay, but for this path, this is a maximal path. Okay. So even though this is not the longest path, okay, because the longest path should take these edges, okay, these edges. So this is not the longest path, but this is maximal in the sense that we cannot extend or add edges to the endpoints, okay? So this is a maximal path. So after we have the maximal path, and also it is easy to find a maximal path. So how to find a maximal path? 就是给你一个 graph， 要怎么找到 maximal path？ So it should be like trivial. Yeah, so you just start, for example, from an edge, and then you just keep looking at the endpoint of the path you have, and just add edges until, for example, there's no other edge instant to the endpoint, or the edge connects back to some vertex in the path. Then in this case, again, you cannot add this edge. Okay? So just keep adding edges to the endpoints until you cannot do it. And then that's it. Okay? All right, so we can always find a maximal path, and it is easy. And the second step, we want to find a cycle that contains all the vertices in this path P. Okay? So this is the second step. Okay? And by the way, this is done on the original graph. Okay? There's an input graph, and this input graph has this property that the minimum degree is at least n over 2. So you have an input graph, and on this input graph, you first find a maximal path, P, and then you try to find a cycle that contains all the vertices on this path P. Okay? Yeah, now the question is, so how to find this cycle? Okay, so we're going to discuss this after we finish the algorithm. Okay. So now we have a cycle. Okay. Imagine that there's a black box algorithm that can complete this task. Okay. So you give this maximal path P, and you give this graph G, and the black box somehow magically outputs a cycle. Okay. So if C is a Hamiltonian cycle, just output C. Okay. Otherwise, if C is not a Hamiltonian cycle, that is, this cycle does not contain every vertex in the graph. Some vertex is not on this cycle C. Okay? So when this happens, I claim that we can find a longer maximal path P. Okay? So after we find this longer maximal path, we just repeat the process. So we go to step 2. Okay? So now, let's first consider the third step. That is, when the cycle is not a Hamiltonian cycle, how to find a longer maximal path. Okay, so we start from a maximal path P, and we have a cycle C that contains all the vertices on the path P. And if this C is not a Hamiltonian cycle, this means some vertex V is not on the cycle. And I claim, then we can find a path that is longer than this path P. Okay, 所以大家看得出来为什么吗？ And this is under the assumption that the minimum degree is at its n over 2. Okay? So when the minimum degree is at its n over 2, we can find a longer path. And the reason is quite simple.所以我们现在有一个 cycle C， 你唯一需要知道资讯就是这样子，你有一个 cycle C， 然后你有一个点没有在这个 C 上面。那事实上，如果你的 minimum degree 是 n over 2， 至少是n的话，那你一定可以找到一个更长的 path。换句话说，它长度可以超过这整个 cycle。有可能，因为搞不好这个就直接就把头跟尾接在一起了。对，但是现在要找到一个更长，比这个，你可以把它想比这个蓝色的，这个蓝色的它上面可能也有一些点 ，OK， 但我可以找到一个比所有的蓝色的点更多的一个 path。So I'll give you a hint. Okay, so the hint is that when the minimum degree is at its n over 2, the graph must be如果最小 degree 是n connected, okay? So we can know that this is a connected graph. So if this is a connected graph, then how to find a longer path? So if this is a kinetic graph, then for this vertex V, there must be a path that connects this vertex V to the cycle. So, well, we can then use this red path and the cycle to form a longer path. Okay. Yeah, so this is why when the graph is connected and if there's a vertex not on a cycle, then we can always find a longer path. Okay, so now we know that we know how to find a maximal path and we know how to find a longer path. So the remaining question is how to find a cycle. Okay, so after the break, we're going to discuss the second step. Okay. Okay. So let's continue. Okay. So this algorithm has 3 steps. Okay. So the first step is always doable. Okay, because all you need to do is to find a maximal path, which is easy. And the third step is always doable if the minimum degree is at least n/2. Okay, because if the minimum degree is at least n/2, then the graph is connected, so we can find a path that is outside the cycle and use this path along with the cycle to create a longer path. Okay. And because our assumption is that the minimum degree is at least n/2, so yeah, the third step is also doable. Okay. So how about the second step? So can you always find a cycle that contains all the vertices on this maximal path P? So I'm going to argue that this is also doable if the minimum degree is at least n/2. Okay? Okay, so if all these 3 steps are always doable, then we know that we can always output a Hamiltonian cycle. Okay? Because if not, then there's a longer path, and then we can find a longer cycle. And once again, check whether this longer cycle is a Hamiltonian cycle or not. If not, we can keep finding a longer cycle until we find a Hamiltonian cycle. Okay, so once we show that the second step is always doable, then we finish the proof. Okay, so we know that when the minimum degree is at least n/2, the graph must have a Hamiltonian cycle. And also we have an algorithm, okay? Okay? So in the second step, there's a maximal path P, okay? And your job is to find a cycle that contains all the vertices on P, okay? You must use some edges not on P, okay? Because if you only use edges on a path, there's no cycle, okay? So how to add edges to the path so that you can have a cycle that contains all the vertices. 我们现在问题就是你有一个 maximal path P 然后我们要找一个 cycle 可以包含所有的点 ，OK， 所以你势必需要加一些边，OK， 我所以加一些边就是你必须要用一些在这个本来的 graph G 里面有的边，是我现在没有画出来，所以我现在要问大家的是你要怎么去加这些边 ，OK。所以你可以想象，有哪一些边如果存在这个 graph 的话，它就会有一个 cycle， 包含所有的点。所以举例来讲 ，the most obvious case is when there's an edge between the first and last vertex. Okay. So let's assume that there are k vertices on the path P, okay? So if there's an edge between V1 and Vk, then obviously there's a cycle, okay? And this cycle contains all the vertices on P, okay? So this is one way to find the cycle. Is there a different way to find the cycle? Well, let's see. Okay, so if the two endpoints have a common neighbor, well, close, but this is not a cycle. Right? Close, close. But yeah, this gives us a nice hint. The hint is that we can find multiple edges. So exactly like in this case, 2. So we can add 2 edges and try to use these 2 edges to form a cycle. And yeah, but we cannot use both 2, okay? Because this does not create a cycle. So let's assume that we keep the first edge. Now my question is how to add the second edge so that there's a cycle containing all the vertices. 我现在有保留这个蓝色的 edge， 然后我要大家再加一个 edge， 然后这个 edge 加上去之后，你就可以拿到一个 cycle， 而且这个 cycle 会包含所有的点。VK 差在2、3、4中间，这句话的意思是，
就再加一个 edge。
嘿，然后这 edge 的2个端点是 VK 跟2、3、4嘛？
就是如果现在蓝色是 V1 跟 V3的话，
蓝色是 V1 跟现在的话是 V1 跟 V5。对。
因为我开始想，如果 V1 跟 V3 之间是一个 edge， 那 VK 接跟 V2 中间有 edge， 那它们就会有一个 cycle。
你说 V1 跟 V3？
对。
V1 跟 V3。
先不考虑一个，就是先
你就这样子。
对，然后 VK 跟 V2 接在一起。
啊哈。
然后就会有个 cycle。
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So this is one way to create a cycle. So where's the cycle?
V1 到 V3， 然后 V3 再到 VK， 然后 VK 回到 V2， 然后 V2 再。
Yeah, yeah, right. So after you add 2 edges, you have to remove some edge from the path in order to create the cycle. So the edge that we're going to remove is the one between V1 and V2. So if you remove this edge, you're going to have a cycle that contains all the vertices. So in the previous case, if there's an edge between V1 and V5, so in this case, how to add the second edge to create a cycle? Right, so the same idea, okay? So it's like we need like 2 crossing edges, okay? So these 2 crossing edges are from V1 and V2. Okay, sorry, V1 and VK, okay? And their neighbors are like they're crossing, okay? So V1 is adjacent to V5, and VK is adjacent to like the left neighbor of V5. Okay, so actually there are lots of different ways to create a cycle. So for example, if V1 is adjacent to V7, then in order to create a cycle, the left neighbor of V7 should be adjacent to VK. Okay, so there are lots of different ways to create a cycle. Okay, so the idea is that, well, first we can check if V1 is adjacent to VK, okay? This is the obvious case. And if V1 is not adjacent to VK, then we can use the second idea, okay? So we want to find VI such that V1 is adjacent to Vi, and Vk is adjacent to Vi minus 1. Okay? So if we can find this Vi and Vi minus 1, then yeah, we can build a cycle. Okay. So we're going to show that if the minimum degree is large enough, that is greater than or equal to n over 2, that we can always find either V1 is adjacent to Vk or such a vertex Vi. Okay? So this is what we're going to prove next. So let's just call this crossing neighbors. Okay, so we'll say that Vi and Vi minus 1 are crossing neighbors. Okay. So this is what we're going to prove next. Okay. So the first part about the claim is the setup, the assumption. The assumption is that the minimum degree is at least n over 2, and we have a maximal path P. Okay. So we're going to write this maximal path using the sequence order, the vertex sequence. So V1, V2 up to Vk. Okay, so the real part that we're going to prove is that if we know that the two endpoints are not connected, are not adjacent, and then we can always find the crossing neighbors. That is, there's a vertex Vi such that V1 is adjacent to Vi, and if you consider the left neighbor, that is Vi minus 1, this is the left neighbor of Vi, then this one is adjacent to Vk. So we can use these crossing edges to build a cycle. Okay. Okay, so if we finish the proof, then we finish the analysis of the algorithm. Okay. we're going to prove by contradiction. Okay, so if we want to prove by contradiction, then this means we assume that there's no such vertex Vi. Okay. Or that there's no crossing neighbors. Okay, and then we try to find some contradiction. Okay. So before I give you the formal proof, I want to first give you the intuition. Okay. So the intuition is that if the minimum degree is n/2, then there's a large degree. Okay. So if the minimum degree is n/2, this means V1 is adjacent to at least half of the vertices on the path. Similarly, Vk is adjacent to half of the vertices on the path. So there are lots of like incoming edges towards the internal vertices. So if there are lots of edges try to connect to the internal vertices, then it should be easy to find crossing edges. OK， 所以如果我们的 minimum degree 是够大的，就左右两边，因为我们事实上是每一个点，所以就包含左右两边。OK， 左右两边它就应该要有很多个 edge 会连进来。OK， 那如果左右两边有很多的 edge 连进来的话，我们就很容易看到这种交错的 edge。OK， 那事实上还有一个点我刚刚没有特别讲，就是说我说这些左右两个端点它会有很多个 edge 连进来，有没有可能它有一些 edge 是往外连的？
不可能，因为如果它往外的边的话，它就可以有一个更长的。
Right. So because we assume that this P is a maximal path, so all the edges, or all the neighbors of the two endpoints must be on the path. Okay. So if there's a neighbor of Vk is not on the path, then we can actually extend the path. Okay. If there's an outgoing edge from the endpoint towards some vertex that is not on the path, then this will not be a maximal path. Similarly for V1. So if there's a neighbor of V1 that is not on the path, then we can use the edge to find a longer path. Right, so say if this is not a maximal path, then you're going to check V1 and Vk, check whether there's some neighbor that is not on the path. Yeah. Okay. So because we assume that this is a maximal path, so all the neighbors of V1 and Vk must be on the path. Okay? So there are lots of incoming edges from the two endpoints toward the internal vertices. OK， 所以刚刚只是给大家一个直觉，就是，如果说今天左右两边有很多 edge， 有很多 neighbor， 那因为这是 maximal path， 它的 neighbor 就一定会在这个 path， 它不会在外面，因为在外面你就可以找到一个更长的 path， 那就不是 maximal。OK， 所以如果你左右两边有很多连进来的，那就会有很多这种 crossing 的 edge。所以这个大概是直觉 ，OK。所以接下来是 formal 的 proof。OK， So let's first consider this set, okay, from V2 to Vk minus 1. Okay, so I claim that V1 has at least n over 2 minus 1 neighbors in this red set. Okay, so this contains V2, V3 up to Vk minus 1.所以这边红色这边画就是所有介于 V2 到 Vk 减1的 vertex， 然后在这个 path 上面。然后我要说的是 V1 它在这个 set 里面有很多邻居 ，OK， 至少会有2分针再减1个邻居。所以有人可以知道为什么吗？对啊，所以这样为什么？sorry. Yeah. Let's do this step by step. Okay. So let's first consider this set. Okay. And yeah. So there should be no minus 1. Okay. So why is this correct? 为什么？但为什么会在这个里面？那为什么不会在 VK？ 为什么不会？搞不好他邻居在 VK。Yeah. So yeah, because of this assumption. Okay, we assume that V1 is not adjacent to VK. Okay, so VK cannot be a neighbor of V1. So all the neighbors of V1 must be in this red box. Okay, and this is also due to the fact that this path P is maximal. Okay. Now let's consider a smaller set. Excluding V2. Okay. So I claim that for this blue set, V1 has at least n over 2 minus 1 neighbors. Why? Because we know that V2 is adjacent to V1. So since we remove V2 from the set, the number of neighbors is reduced by 1. Okay? Next, let's consider this green set. So this is the left neighbors of the blue set. Okay? Okay? So just left shift the box. Okay? So this time we have V2 back in the set, but we remove Vk minus 1. So I claim that in this green set, at least n over 2 minus 1 are not neighbors of Vk. So can you see why? Right, so because we assume that there's no crossing neighbors, okay? So if you consider the left neighbors of this set, okay, then their left neighbors cannot be adjacent to Vk. Otherwise, we're going to have crossing neighbors, okay? So this is due to the assumption that there's no crossing neighbor, okay? 大家知道这个意思吗？ Okay. Now, once again, let's consider this green set. I claim that at least n over 2 minus 1 vertices are adjacent to VK or are neighbors of VK. Okay, so the same green set, but this time we consider the neighbors of VK. Okay, and I claim that VK has at least n/2 minus 1 neighbors in this green set. So can you see why? Right, so basically we use the same argument here, okay, as the blue set. Okay, so because the path is a maximal path, so all the neighbors of VK must be on the path. And because in this green set, we exclude VK minus 1. So we have minus 1 here. And also because V1 cannot be a neighbor of VK due to the assumption of the claim, so we know that we don't need to consider V1. Okay? So yeah, that is n/2 minus 1 versus are neighbors of VK. All right, so where's the contradiction? Right. So these two sets. So here we have two sets. So the first set is the vertices that are not adjacent to VK. So this is one set. And the second set is the neighbors of VK. So these two sets are disjoint. Okay? So this implies that the green set has a size of at least n/2 minus 1 plus n/2 minus 1. Okay? So So this set has at least n minus 2 vertices. Okay, but you can see that in this set, we do not have V1, we do not have VK minus 1, and we do not have VK. So at least 3 vertices in the graph are not in this green set. Okay, so well, based on this assumption or observation, we know that size should be at most n minus 3. So that's a contradiction. Okay. So let's the proof. Okay. Okay, so any questions? 所以我们就讲完第一个 sufficient condition 的 proof。OK， 所以这里的 sufficient condition 就是只要每一个点的 degree 至少是2/n，那这个 graph 事实上就会变得很 dense， 就是每一个点都有一大堆邻居。在这种 graph 里面，你一定可以找到 Hamiltonian cycle。OK。这边就直接就给了一个演算法，所以某种程度，如果你要实做它的话，就是，你要去实做找 maximum path 这个很容易，然后你要去实做找这个 maximum path 上面的 crossing neighbor， 这个也很容易 ，OK， 然后有了 crossing neighbor 之后，你就可以找到一个 cycle， 然后有了 cycle 之后，你就会去看它有没有包含所有的点，如果没有的话，一定你可以找到一个 path。把那个没有在这个 cycle 上面的点连回去这个 cycle， 这个也很容易，所以你就不断的 repeat， 一直重复，你就可以找到一个 Hamiltonian cycle。如果 minima degree 是至少2分之 n 的话。第三个情况指的是，你的第三个情况是，你说有没有可能会需要第二个 round 是不是？啊，嗯哼，对。这是一个好问题。对，所以你的问题是，如果 degree 是2分之 n， 至少是2分之 n 的话，那是不是任何的 maximal path 它都会包含所有的点？我的直觉是不一定，因为可这样不会有 cycle。对，加2条线，然后呢？哈，不一定。我知道。我觉得这个图应该怎么画？如果是这样的，应该怎么画 maximal path 都会包含所有点。因为譬如说，如果你只包含其中一个 bridge 的话，那你在这2个左右延伸，你一定可以包含所有的点，因为这是 complete graph。这也是左右延伸，它一定也可以包含所有点，所以这也会变 complete graph。因为它是 complete graph， 所以它。你是说根本不会用到任何一个这个边吗？
就是他在找那个maximal test。
OK， 了解。OK， 了解。好。这样子。
可这样不符合这个 minimum degree 是2分之 n 的条件啊！你看右上角那个点，它只有3个点，这个图应该要至少4个点。
对。
那你就调整一下，把一边变大，然后一边变小，然后变小那边，因为它只用大一点2分之 n， 所以不用连到左边那边的所有的点，那就会保证有左边那边可能有2个点没有调到右边的方向。
哎，这个我不是很确定，但是我想到一个可能性。哦，6个点。哦，了解。对，这样子。OK， 很好。OK， 所以不是真的不是一个 round 就一定可以结束，有时候 maximal path 它没办法包含所有的点。还有其他问题吗？因为只剩10分钟，我可能没办法再讲下一个 sufficient 的 condition， 所以我们就会留到下礼拜。OK， 好，所以记得就是回去要找你的组员。如果你找不太到，比如说你对大家不太熟悉，你可以寄 email 给我，我可以帮你分配这样子。好，然后如果你找到组员，就赶快去登记你的组员跟你的 paper。OK， 好，所以我们就上到这里。
那个就是在这里就是在证明这个一定会有这个 crossing edge。
这里是这里。
他可不可以用正面去证？就是他不要用。
有机会，嘿。
因为我有个想法，我想问是不是对的，就是因为它至少是2分之 n 嘛，所以然后又假设说 v1 不会连到 vk， 所以 v1 只会连到 v2 到 k 减1，这样是 k 减2个。就它只有可能连到这 k 减2个。
对。
那它的 degree 又至少是2分之 n，
对，
所以它一定会，所以 v1 是，它可能连到前面这2分之 n， 然后 vk 也一定会连到这2分之 n， 所以它中间他们两个一定会 overlap 的地方。
对，没错，当然也可以，可是我之所以会这样写，是因为我这样我可以比较精准的把那个 argument 讲出来。当然你确实没错，就是你有点可以讲说，就是我先去考虑 V1 的邻居 ，OK， 然后 V1 的邻居再去考虑他的类似 left 的 neighbor， 然后我会说这个 left 的 neighbor 里面。一定至少有一个是跟 VK 相连，因为 VK 的 A degree 够大，就没错，我可以做这件事情了，但所以我觉得可以，对。
一下就是这边这反正这地方到底是
哪一个部分？
就是刚刚
最后这个部分就是2个2分之 n 减1怎么得到变成 n 减2这里吗？
对，我从一开始理解啊，就是这边找的这个 set 就是把 v1， 然后 v1 它这边最多，因为这边一定有大于2分之 n 个这个 vertex 在这个除了 v1 以外的这个 set。
还有至少2分之 n 个 neighbors， 就 v1， 对
neighbor set 在这里面。
对。
然后后来就是把 v2 再去掉，然后再往后找一个。
对。
然后就是减掉这个，就是减掉 v2 这个点，
对，
减1，然后再来就是一开始为什么要左移
？OK， 因为 OK 左移就是因为我想要用反证法，所以就是不会有 crossing 的 neighbor， 所以换句话说，如果 V1 它有一个边连到这个点的话，那这一个它的 left neighbor。
左移，就假设左移的时候，你把这个点移出去了，然后这一个不会有这边过来的这个。
对，所以这是我为什么要左移一格，因为左移一格就是要去考虑所有他们的 neighbor 的 left neighbor。V1 的对。
可以再继续就是推下去，就是继续缩小，然后继续左移这样子。
可是没有必要，因为
就一步其实就已经把想要效果就达到了。
对，因为这里的 crossing 就是一定要刚好只差1，因为如果是 V5，
所以就有点像是你就直接找这边这2个当这个 crossing， 就是可能这边的这几个当 crossing 的 neighbor 就够了，就这够证明了。
我觉得我不是很理解这句话。
就是反正就是只要找这2个其中的，那这样应该是，等一下，那这样应该是指定这边的这个什么中间的这个节点吧，去证明是吗？因为你不是说随便找一个点这样子，然后去找它的这个前一个，然后去画出这个 cross neighbor 嘛，然后反正是就是不要让，就把这个东西去掉，把这个节点去掉之后，它的前一个不会有 cross neighbor 这样子，对不对？就那没关系。
我觉得我没有100%了解，但是我硬要我说，我会说是对，所以就maybe 我可以再说一次，就是这里蓝色的框框里面有蛮多的 V1 的 neighbor，那这些 neighbor 如果我们去看它左边的那一个，它就不能跟 VK 相邻嘛，因为如果左边的那个跟 VK 相邻，就代表我们有 crossing 的 neighbor。
就是他们都不能连到左边，就对了。
也不是说不行，就是如果
就会有 cross neighbor。
对，如果像这个是假设是 VK 减3，所以 VK 减3如果跟 V1 相邻，那根据我们的假设 VK 减4就一定不能跟 VK 相邻，因为不然的话我们就有 crossing 的 neighbor，所以这就是为什么。
所以才往后只扣一个的。
对。
我只需要找它前一个。
对，没错。
好，
没错。
然后再就是下面的话，所以这个是因为就是不能有这个 cross neighbor 的。
对，
所以就是
没错。
因为这一边有这么多个 neighbor， 所以反过来这边就不可以有。
没错。
这么多个。
没错。
那可是为什么最后还是要加起
等
来？
一下，我这一个上面右边这个至少2/2减1个点不是 VK 的 neighbor， 是因为我看了上面蓝色这一点。我知道这个蓝色框框里面有很多是 V1 的邻居，所以我知道那些 V1 邻居，如果看他们的 left neighbor， 它就一定不是 VK 的邻居，所以我才有这一个。那这一个呢？这一个是因为知道 VK 它其实有很多邻居，在整个 path 上面，所以事实上这个绿色里面一定会有2/2减1个是 VK 的邻居。所以我们一步一步来，这个 OK 吗？
不是。
这个 OK 吗？这个 OK 吗？那这个，我现在刚刚的 argument 是说绿色的有很多都不是 VK 的邻居，这我们已经结束，可以接受。所以我接下来要说服你的是，绿色的也有很多是 VK 的邻居，这我接下来要说服你。好，那我要怎么说服你呢？因为第一个这个是 maximal path，然后如果是 maximal path 就代表 VK 的所有的邻居都已经在这个 path 上面，然后你也先不用去管绿色框框，就管整个 path 就好。所以 VK 有很多邻居在这个绿色，在这个 path 上面。然后因为我们有一个假设是所有 degree 至少是2/2嘛。对，所以就代表说 VK 有2/2个邻居是在整条 path 上面。到这边可以接受。那所以直觉上来讲，是整条 path 跟绿色框框其实没有差多少。
就有点大概的。
对，所以我要先给你一个大概感觉，就是其实 VK 有很多邻居在这个 path。对，只是说你真的要来看这个绿色框框的话，为什么是变2/2减1？减1就是因为 VK 减1，它其实就已经是 VK 的邻居了。所以我绿色框框因为没有考虑它，所以我觉得这边会减
1。因为就像左移，所以就把这个东西减掉了。可是这样取而代之是加了这个。
对，所以这个 V2 有可能长度是一样的。
一样的，所以
对
的这个至少也是有2/2减1个邻居，所以这个长度是一样的，是这样子看的。
我不会回到这里，我会说，就这个绿色的框框，它其实就是整个 path， 然后扣掉 VK 减1跟 V1。对，V1 跟 VK 已经不会相邻，这个我们知道。
对。
然后 VK 减1是它会跟 VK 相邻。对，所以我这边要减1。对。
因为有那个至 至少这边还是有很多的点是 VK 的 neighbor，
没错，
然后可是因为你往这边移，所以你要减掉这个，因为
VK 减1
因为 VK 减1本来就是这个算
没错
里面，所以就不用考虑它了嘛。
也不是说不用考虑它，就是因为它不在绿色的盒子、绿色的 box 里面，然后但它又是 VK 邻居，所以我这边要扣1，所以这边是2分之 n 减1。
哦，除了 VK 减1以外的邻居。
没错，没错，你可以这样说，对，就除了 VK 减1之外，会有它的邻居都会在这个绿色的框框里面，对。
然后
那最后就是说这个绿色的，
就是要算
它的总共的大小。
总共的大小。
对，因为这个绿色的就是分两类的，一类就是跟 VK 相邻，
不是 VK 的 neighbor 跟
是
VK 的
对
neighbor
所以这两个一定不会有交集嘛，不可能说有一个它是就不对，
不可能是就是不可能是。
对，所以就代表说这个绿色 box 的 size 至少就是这两个的加起来，所以就是 n 减2，
所以最后就加起来是
大于等于 n 减2，对，但这个就不可能。
对。
因为至少有3个点不在里面，所以应该最多是 n 减3。对。
因为 V1 然后
VK 减1 ，VK 都不在里面。对。
好，那懂。
OK，好，对。